Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our session on Youth Demand Action on Climate here in Davos, Switzerland at the 2023 World Economic Forum. So this session on youth demanding action is particularly exciting to me. I should start by introducing myself. My name is Susanna Hancock, and I'm the science manager of Arctic Basecamp. But the session is particularly exciting for me because I am also the president of the International Association for Polar Early Career Scientists. So I'm working with both myself as an early career scientist and with others on how we can use our voices and our contributions. But I also am excited about the session because I was 4 when I decided I wanted to be a scientist. At that time, it was an astrophysicist. And I, before too long, became a bit jaded by astronomy and astrophysics, by many of my peers who were talking about life on extraterrestrial planets. Not just the search for life, but where we can go when we can no longer habit the Earth. And that was something that really bothered me because we were talking about it in a way that almost gave us permission to destroy the Earth because we would have Earth 2.0. So in my young mind, I decided that if we can save the poles, we could contribute to climate stability. The fact, though, is that the poles are anything but stable. I have done now 3 polar expeditions of various sorts, most recently getting back last June from an expedition in which we sought to recreate an expedition from 150 years ago that attempted to be the first to the North Pole. Ultimately, they failed because there was too much ice, whereas we failed because there was not enough ice. I stood at 80 degrees north. To the day in which this crew from 150 years ago, to the day and location, were iced in and had to get out of their sailboats after being iced in for 2 years to ski north. I started on skis and was heading north along their same path. But at that place where they were frozen in, I was collecting liquid water samples. But the water wasn't just pure. It was filled with plastics. There was some fishing line, the size of my hand. There were microplastics that were killing 90% of the local bird species. They were getting into the fish. There were plastics about the size of me that had come from tens of thousands of kilometers away, continents away, getting into the ocean systems and getting into the northern poles. We melted snow for water. But the snow, again, even in such a remote location, more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest settlement, the nearest town of any size, was contaminated with those forever chemicals. In a place that should have been so pure, our human existence, our human trash was there. This spot of the world in the north of Svalbard is warming 7 times faster than our planetary average. But these locations, these risks, this warming isn't isolated to the polar regions, though, but yet translates to global risks around the world. We saw just this past year, with Pakistan being 2/3 of the country underwater with its floods, in which places were getting more than 800, 900% their average annual rainfall in just a couple of weeks. I was in New York City in September, where they're still recovering from Hurricane Sandy, which caused $18 billion in damage 10 years ago. And while they've had increasing storms since, the damage that storm caused, that they have yet to recover, is what is going to be their new normal within just a couple of decades. The melt at this current rate of the polar ice, the Arctic sea ice, and the permafrost that is thawing with it is going to cause around the world $70 trillion US dollars of damages around the world. That affects everyone, whether New York, whether Pakistan. It affects everywhere, that we will certainly discuss in a moment. Here, for those of us who arrived in Davos a little bit early, we have seen that there was no snow. The ski mountain here is still closed. Across the way, they're relying on artificial snow. But it's not just about snow. At my house, when we have a winter without much snow, we have huge species die-offs in the summer. That affects the biodiversity, which affects our ability as humans to achieve our global sustainability development goals. But in other places, such as the Himalayas, we are relying on those glaciers for the fossil fuel transition of two of the world's largest economies. So the lack of snow isn't just about our immediate environment. It isn't just about those polar regions. It is about the security of the entire planet. But there is hope, and we can see, as in recent news has picked up a story on the ozone layer, and we can see that the ozone layer is slowly recovering from our chemicals that we have put into the atmosphere earlier last century. The first two UN protocols, conventions, Vienna and Montreal, that sought to identify and eradicate chemicals that were degrading the ozone layer, were the first two UN protocols that were unanimously agreed upon because of their importance for the sustainability of humanity. We acted on those, we had unanimous agreement, and we are seeing the results now. So this is, that's for me a sign that, we know the action we need to take, we can take the action, and we can have amazing results from that action. So as we move on through the session, I just want to introduce everyone, and then we're going to hear a little bit from each person here. That's fine. So I'm going to just do a quick round of introductions, and then I'm going to come back to each. So over on my left here, we have Arthi from Canada, and Fabien from France, and Hui Bing from Malaysia. First time she's seen snow. Amalia from Brazil, and Wodamaya from Ghana. So I'll start off with you, Arthi. If you want to just introduce yourself. You're a polar scientist, early career scientist, so you and I work together, known each other for a few years. You're from Canada. Would you like to just say who you are and why this is important to you?
For sure, thank you. So I'm Arthi, I'm from Montreal, Canada. I'm an Arctic researcher. I've always been passionate about the oceans. I come from a country that has 3 coasts, 3 oceans. So I've always been passionate about the life that lives in the ocean, but also the life that depends on the ocean. I'm a first-generation Canadian Indian. My family also lives along the coast of India, so the ocean has been something I've always thought about. So as an Arctic researcher, I have been given the wonderful opportunity to travel to the Arctic, to work in the communities, and I've seen climate change and its drastic consequences firsthand. The Arctic is not some sort of frontier area. People live there. People depend on the land, especially local indigenous communities. So my research background is looking at how bacteria in the Arctic Ocean are adapting and evolving to climate change. But more importantly, we should ask the question, how are the people living there adapting to climate change? It's the most vulnerable communities that are facing the largest consequences. And we see that with caribou migrations changing, beluga whale migrations changing, and the indigenous communities that live up there are depending on these species for their food. We're seeing an increase in food insecurity. With permafrost thaw and with coastal erosion, we're seeing an increase in housing insecurity. And these communities are facing consequences that they did not create. And so it's up to us to help and find a solution. Climate change in the Arctic, it's warming 3 to 4 times faster than the global rate. They're dealing with consequences that we will soon see down south. And so we need to have action now, not later. And I think it's very important to remind ourselves that we're in this together. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. right? So increased sea level rise, extreme changes in weather pattern, it's all linked to changes in the Arctic, and this affects everyone globally. So we have to come together to work together to find a solution, because we do only have one planet. We don't have Earth 2.0 to flee to, and we shouldn't. We should save what we have now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthi. So I'll pass it to Fabien. You're an early career scientist as well, young scientist from France.
Yeah, from France, but based in University College London, UK. Yeah, during my PhD, I've been working in the Congo Basin, working with indigenous people to support them to collect ecological data so that they can become the leaders of the conservation of ecosystems and biodiversity. This is part of a broader effort that we call extreme citizen science that is dedicated to give anyone, anywhere, the means to contribute to science. So we have especially targeted the low literate people with low technical literacy, which are over 1 billion around the earth. So, for instance, we have also been working with the fishermen in the Pantanal in Brazil to support landscape restoration, but also the San people in Ethiopia for resource management in Ethiopia as well, with farmers and agro-pastoralists to address food insecurity and water stress. And among our 21 case studies, I can also mention the one in India, where with indigenous people, again, we work to support them to collect data on flood damages. So what I'm doing now, one of the reasons why I'm in Davos, is to transform all of this great effort to build a startup, an impact science startup, so that this effort can really be upscaled. The problem is that the multiplication of global risks, such as extreme weather, flood damages, biodiversity loss, disease, extreme weather, seriously affects the daily activities of businesses, NGOs, governments. And one of the solutions to that is to enable anyone to contribute to science, because the more you have knowledge, the more you can see changes, model the future, and make better decisions. So as part of this process of building up an impact science startup, we have secured 150K from the European Space Agency, and I'm looking for the other half to unlock this money. So if you want to contribute to this, please get in touch with me or my team. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabien. So Hui Bing, who's from Malaysia and a young activist.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lim Hui Bing. I'm a Malaysian climate activist. So I'm here today as a youth ambassador for Arctic Basecamp, and I'm also a doctor in training. Okay. So a little bit about how I came here. So I started getting involved with climate action back during the pandemic, when I saw that there were a lot of single-use plastic waste because of takeaway boxes. Because at that time, we were not allowed to travel outside. So from there, I established a venture to repurpose plastic waste into home items, so you can prolong the lifespan of this plastic waste and remove them from circulation. So that was just a project I had during the pandemic. But after we started recovering, I realized that climate change does not only increase global temperatures. In Malaysia, we are experiencing more and more rainfall, and we have more frequent floods, which is affecting more than 100,000 Malaysians and displaced them from their homes. And before we can even recover from this flood, we get hit with another flood. So it is atrocious that Malaysians have to brace themselves for another flood before we even recover from the last. Then what comes with global rising temperatures and floods is health problems. So climate change causes a lot of health problems, and in Malaysia, we can see an increased trend in mosquito-borne and waterborne diseases. that should not happen, that shouldn't happen in anywhere in the world. So just to give you some context, just in 1 year alone, Malaysia has experienced a 145% increase in dengue cases, and it has cost more lives than it should. So today I'm here with Arctic Basecamp to speak my science to power, and my science is healthcare. So Malaysia only contributes to less than 1% of global emissions, and yet we are committed to climate action. But if the world's largest polluters do not take action, Malaysians will face the consequences of their irresponsibility. And I will not tolerate the lack of will of developed nations in protecting the earth that we all share. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So next is Amalia from Brazil. And
Yeah, so hi, my name's Amalia. I'm a 19-year-old climate activist from Brazil. And I'm also a physics student, hoping to be a climate scientist. I started my activism in 2019 after a long period of climate anxiety. So for a long time, I was seeing the news and reading about climate change, but not only just climate change, seeing the news about natural disasters happening everywhere, and especially in my country. And I felt this deep sense of uncertainty about my future, but also about short-term things that could happen. And I had this weekend where I had like this deep conclusion that if I had all these feelings and if I had this uncertainty, the only thing I could do was act. And so I researched every single movement I could, and I joined Fridays for Future. I protested every week until the pandemic started. As I started protesting, a plan to build what would be Brazil's biggest open-pit coal mine came to public, very near my city. It would have a mineral pile so big that we would be able to see it from the whole city, basically. And I live in a capital of a state in Brazil with over 2 million people. So it would have a deep impact in our health. That was the first time I was confronted with this investment in fossil fuels so close to my home. Fortunately, this project was suspended, and it was thanks to many, many organizations, but it was a deeply unsettling thing that happened right as I started activism. When the pandemic started, I got engaged nationally and internationally, and we started a bunch of projects and we did online strikes, but simultaneously we were going through a rough period in Brazil because the government was committed to destroying the environment. We had a lot of policies being pushed that were going against our forests, our biomes, and were basically helping agribusiness, illegal miners, and illegal lodgers. Thankfully now, our government has changed, but there's still so much we need to do. There's still a lot of policies we need to undo, a lot of practices we need to undo, and so much action we need to push. In Brazil, we have severe fires, droughts, floods happening all at the same time. While my region is having a severe drought, just in the north, we have severe floods at the same time of the year. And this is all consequence of climate change, but it's because our world is interconnected. When we say what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, and that's true to all our biomes, what happens in the Amazon rainforest affect all of the rainforests in Brazil, all of the biomes in Brazil and in other places. So we need this intersectional climate action, and we need leaders to consider that not all countries are equally responsible, and not all countries are able to act equally. We need the historically responsible countries for climate change to act and to fund loss and damage, which we talk about a lot and was talked a lot about in this year's COP. But also, not just loss and damage, but we need to fund a just transition in these countries. A worldwide just transition that considers the people, not just renewable energy, but the people living in the areas where the renewable energies will be placed. So what I mean is, I want climate action, but I want a climate action that is just and intersectional. Thank you.
Thank you, Amalia. So
Thank you.
we also now are very happy to have Wodamaya with us. He is a YouTuber from Ghana, and he is on a mission to transform the negative narrative that surrounds so much of his continent with stories and themes of African excellence and the continent's beauty.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad to be on the same panel with scientists. I'm not a scientist, neither am I an activist, but I'm a guy coming from Africa that I love Africa so much. Africa is so dear to my heart. And the fact that the world leaders, the world countries with power are taking advantage of those vulnerable countries. I climbed Kilimanjaro last year, and Africa's last glacier is disappearing because of climate change. If you go to Tanzania, there's a river that always overflows its banks just because of climate change. If you go to Niger, we have food drought, all because of climate change. We know the problems, but why do we always have to meet at one place called COP to discuss the problem? And when you are going in there, we all be on a private jet, knowing that you are still, causing more damage. I think we need actions now. Listen, when you talk about food security in Africa, it's a big problem, just because of climate change. So what I'm saying is that if anyone is watching me, if you know that you are part of the problem, it's time to change your ways. We need to take care of nature so that nature can take care of us. If you don't take care of nature, by the end of the day, we'll all disappear. Because humans are the one that is destroying the earth. We all know it. And we should stop beating around the bush and start facing the exact problem, right? So I am here, not an activist, but I support them 100%. And I'm just letting you all know that it's time for climate action. It's time for us to stop our ways that damages the earth. We need earth, just like the way earth also needs us. Thank you so much, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all.
Thank you so much. If you want to pass that microphone to Amalia. Yeah. So Amalia, you're from Brazil. You mentioned a little bit of the political struggles that you were facing as an activist. And Brazil's in the news a bit now for the recent election of Lula. So what demands do you have as whether Brazil in the news or from you coming here speaking to global leaders at Davos?
Yeah, so Lula has promised a lot on the environment. He has made a lot of statements saying that Brazil will be back to being a climate leader, a country that leads discussions on climate action. And my first demand is what we've been saying here. I want what he's saying to be turned into a reality. I want his words to be turned into action. I want Brazil to lead these discussions on loss and damage, on reparation. We need this government that actually recognizes that climate change exists to take charge. For the first time, we have a ministry for the indigenous people with Sonia Guajajara, a great indigenous leader, and a ministry for racial equality with Aniele Franco, also a great leader. And these ministries, along with our Ministry for the Environment, which is now called Ministry for the Environment and Climate Change with Marina Silva, who is actually here at the World Economic Forum. I believe that these women represent such a good change in our government, and they give me hope that what they've been preaching about in their previous jobs and their previous work can be put into a reality now that they're in government and in such good positions. And I mean, yeah, I want Brazil to be a climate leader. I want us to be able to invest in climate education and make sure people know about what's happening, because we feel climate change every day. Our summers are getting hotter, our winters are getting unpredictable, but people don't know exactly why necessarily, because we don't have climate education, good climate education yet. So we need climate education, we need climate action, and we need to undo a lot of anti-environmental practices that have been encouraged in the last 4 years. And we really need this to be done now, and as soon as possible, and definitely in this government.
Thank you very much, Amalia. Arthi, I'm wondering if you can pick up on that and talk a little bit more, maybe from a global perspective, why climate action is necessary now.
Yeah, for sure. I think that we do a lot of talking. We do a lot of we should do this, we should do that. We hear that a lot, and we have these great agreements in place. And I think we need to change the way we think about this. We need to change our words, and it should be we are doing this, we are doing that, we are ensuring that we're taking climate action today, now, not tomorrow, because really we don't have much of a tomorrow left to do this. So like my colleagues have been saying, action now.
Thank you. If you want to pass it to Fabien. So Fabien, I was hoping it was my poor French when I was listening to Macron's New Year's address, but indeed apparently he did say who could have predicted this climate crisis. So what do you have to say?
Yeah, well, I'm sure that the President Macron will support this way, but we need that policymakers support science-based innovation to go towards market solutions. We have so many innovation waiting for growing up in academia, so we just need to get them out of academia so that they can have an impact.
Thank you. Do you want to take that? So, Huibing, you are 2 months shy of finishing your medical degree, so congratulations for that. But as a soon-to-be doctor, looking at a health perspective, what worries you the most?
Okay, so in the health perspective, I think in the context of mosquito and waterborne diseases, we can prevent them by getting rid of still water and by fogging, but that is, we found out that it is not enough anymore, and that the rising temperature will lead to increase in mosquito breeding, and we cannot stop all mosquito breedings in the country. So I worry that Malaysians will have to go through worsening diseases caused by climate change, and we shouldn't have to. So I also worry that Malaysians have to suffer the consequences because of developed nations' irresponsibility. And I don't want to see Malaysians admit to my wards because of diseases that we can prevent.
And returning to you for our final one in this round. Wadmaya, your hopes and dreams for Africa. What do you demand? You've spoken a little bit about some of the suffering going on in your continent and some of the different countries, but what demands do you have of Africa? What do you need from Africans? What do you need from others?
I think Africans need to be compensated. And when you want to compensate Africans, let the money reflect on the vulnerable people, not just the leaders, because I believe that when it goes to them, the money will not go to the people, because it's the people on the ground that are suffering. I see it every day, and that's why this means a lot to me. And we should not always be meeting and talking all the time with no actions. The people needs to be compensated, and it must be done. Should I say now or today? Now, now and today. Right? Yesterday. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're going to wrap up this session, but just really want to thank our youth ambassadors and early career scientists who are camping with us here, so braving the cold in more ways than one. But this decade, as everyone here has said, is really the critical decade for action. The changes we're seeing, we're no longer talking about what's going to be coming. We're talking about what we're dealing with now. We're talking about, the polar changes that are altering precipitation patterns. We're having direct consequences to things like dengue fever and malaria. This is now, and this is directly a consequence of losing that sea ice if we want to bring it back to the Arctic. But thank you all for coming, and really, this is part of our mission to speak science to power and really enforce that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. So thank you all, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you.